After a grueling month-long federal corruption case, James Carter returned home to find his backyard unrecognizable. Colorful party hats littered the ground, broken chairs and debris were scattered across his once pristine property, and the HOA president, Edward Langston, stood smirking, pointing to obscure fine print James had never noticed. A woman in a sharp business suit, Olivia Grayson, coolly documented his reaction with a tablet. What neither of them anticipated was that James wasn't just any homeowner. He was a retired federal prosecutor with 30 years of experience dismantling the very kind of corruption now encroaching on his life. How would one respond when the organization tasked with safeguarding property rights turned into the instrument of their violation? James Carter had spent 3 decades prosecuting white-collar crime for the Department of Justice before purchasing his dream home, a charming farmhouse on 3 acres in Pinewood Estates. With its wraparound porch and sweeping countryside views, the property's expansive yard offered the privacy and peace he'd earned through years of public service. Though wary of HOAs after hearing colleagues' cautionary tales, Edward Langston, the board president, personally assured him during a firm handshake, "We're not one of those overbearing associations that micromanage your life. We focus on road maintenance and common areas to keep the community pristine and property values high." The $750 annual fee seemed fair for the well-maintained neighborhood, and James signed the paperwork, eager to settle into his retirement haven. Moving in felt like a triumph. The neighbors were friendly, and the serene surroundings were ideal for writing his memoirs. James installed a custom bench under an ancient oak tree, a spot to reflect on his career's toughest cases. "This is everything I've worked for," he told a former colleague at a housewarming party. "A place to unwind without the weight of legal battles." Over his first months, he poured his meticulous nature, the same precision that made him a formidable prosecutor, into personalizing the property. He planted a vegetable garden, restored the original stone paths, and built a koi pond near his reading nook, turning the farmhouse into a sanctuary. "You've made this place truly special," his neighbor, Margaret Evans, remarked one evening. "It's wonderful to see someone cherish the natural beauty here." 6 months later, James noticed unusual activity. Luxury cars with out-of-state plates cruising the neighborhood on weekends, empty champagne bottles in communal trash bins, and catering vans parked at various homes. "Seems like a lot of entertaining lately," he mentioned casually to Margaret, a retired teacher, while helping her with groceries. She looked surprised. "Oh, you haven't been to Edward's exclusive events? They're quite lavish. Last weekend, they had a live band and gourmet stations at the Harrison Place while they were away in Europe." James frowned. "I haven't been invited to anything." "That's strange." Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "They're selective about attendees, I suppose." The next day, James called Edward about these gatherings. Edward's tone turned curt. "These are private community functions. Not everyone qualifies for certain tiers. It's in the updated charter." James pressed, "I don't recall seeing anything about tiers in my HOA documents." Edward replied smoothly, "We've made revisions to enhance engagement. I'll have Olivia send the current bylaws when she's free." Repeated requests for these amendments yielded only excuses about delays. Meanwhile, survey markers appeared along James's property line, near his oak tree and garden. When he removed them, they returned with flags. "I wouldn't touch those," warned Henry Brooks, a retired cop from down the street. The board's serious about their assessments. The Wilsons pushed back and got daily citations until they sold cheap. Edward's cousin bought their place. One morning, James caught Olivia Grayson photographing his backyard from the street. When she saw him, she slipped her camera into her bag and walked off without a word. Soon after, summoned to Washington for a high-profile case, James left reluctantly. Before departing, he noticed board members snapping photos of his property, focusing on his yard. "Routine documentation," Olivia explained dismissively when confronted, her tablet showing a grid of his land with highlighted zones. "Documentation for what?" James demanded. "Community planning," she replied vaguely, brushing him off. Her knowledge of his confidential travel plans unnerved him. He asked Margaret to watch his home, confiding, "Something's off with the HOA's attention." That night, a letter announced a special meeting during his absence, with cryptic agenda items like premium property usage and resource optimization. His request to delay it was denied. For weeks later, victorious but weary from Washington, James returned to chaos. Workers were erecting a tent under his oak tree, setting up tables where his bench once stood, and staking an HOA exclusive event sign in his yard. His garden was trampled, his bench shoved aside, party hats strewn about, and broken chairs littered the grass. His security camera was gone, wires dangling. "What's happening here?" he demanded of a worker near his koi pond. "We have authorization," the contractor replied, showing a document claiming HOA usage rights over premium view properties, with a forged signature resembling James's. "This is my land. I never agreed to this," James said firmly. Edward arrived with Olivia. "You're back early," Edward said with a forced smile. "What's happening on my property?" James demanded. Olivia handed him a bylaw amendment, passed during his absence, asserting temporary recreational easements on select properties for community enrichment, with a 14-day notice allegedly sent while he was away. "This is illegal," James stated. "Membership implies agreement to voted amendments," Olivia countered coolly, recording his reaction. When James ordered the workers off, Edward called security, off-duty cops in uniform. "He's disrupting HOA business," Edward claimed. Showing his DOJ credentials, James retorted, "You're trespassing. That's a crime." Edward scoffed. "Your title means nothing here. This is HOA domain." A security officer warned, "Vacate this easement area or face charges." Incredulous, James asked, "You're arresting me on my own land?" Olivia explained, "It's community space for 48 hours. Your ownership is suspended." As workers damaged his oak tree and spilled ice on his path, James saw caterers unloading for a platinum member gala. Retreating strategically, he began documenting everything: photos, recordings, and guest identities. These weren't neighbors, but wealthy outsiders. County records revealed 4 homes sold below market value after HOA disputes, all bought by Edward's shell companies. HOA finances showed shrinking improvement budgets and a ballooning special projects fund. James emailed a colleague for background checks on Edward and Olivia, uncovering Edward's failing real estate ventures offset by personal wealth, Olivia's shady past, and a conflict-ridden legal counsel. Digging deeper, James found the HOA sold $500 premium memberships to non-residents for access to private properties, generating $250,000 annually, funneled into accounts Edward controlled. Emails confirmed they targeted James's absence to amend bylaws, planning to force him out like others. "They're running a racket," James realized, noting their intent to build a commercial enterprise within the community. Alliance with affected residents, Margaret, the Wilsons, Henry, and others, yielded evidence of systematic harassment. James built a RICO case: racketeering, fraud, conspiracy. At the next gala, he and FBI allies recorded Edward boasting about their scheme. "We make ownership unbearable, acquire cheap, and profit," Edward bragged on James's land. Federal agents arrested Edward, Olivia, and their treasurer mid-party, charging them under RICO. The investigation exposed a multi-state operation for $0.2 million in profits and 60 victimized families. Guilty verdicts brought 5 to 15-year sentences and restitution, restoring homes and savings. A year later, James hosted a true community event in his reclaimed yard, a toast to justice rising above the oak tree he'd fought to protect. "I've spent my life prosecuting people like them," he'd told Edward. "You picked the wrong target."